The Joe Rogan Experience.
So you had this plan to turn this into some sort of a series from the time you released the very first book.
Yeah, from before that. And so what's crazy is that as I'm writing this, now they tell you not to think of someone playing your character as you're writing, but as a child of the 80s, that's almost impossible not to do. So as I'm writing, the crazy part is, like, usually you think of like Mark Wahlberg, or you think of somebody that had done these sort of things kind of before, but I thought of Chris Pratt. And he had just done, all he'd done is Parks and Rec, and he had a small role in Zero Dark 30 where he plays a SEAL. He has like a couple lines in there. And for some reason, I'm like, that's the guy.
Really?
That's him. I had no connection to him. And no, it wouldn't have been the obvious choice back then. This is so I started writing in December of 2014, I think, or early 2015, somewhere there. So
he wasn't this giant movie star back then
nope,
either.
Hadn't done any of that stuff yet. And I thought, you know what, this is a likable guy. And he seems like an awesome dude. I'm getting a good feeling from him. And I thought, growing up in the 80s, I loved Magnum. He started off as a naval intelligence officer, and then they found out about SEALs, the writers. They turned him into a SEAL a couple seasons into it. And like, everybody loved Magnum in the 80s. Women liked him. The guys liked him. Nothing not to like about Magnum. And he also does the first, essentially, what you would call a murder on national television with the other person not having a firearm or a weapon. And it's the end of, I think it's season 3. But a guy that had him as a POW in Vietnam comes to Hawaii. There's a little conspiracy thing involved. And at the end, he thinks he's walking away. And then Magnum asks him if he's seen the sun rise that morning, because that morning when his friend gets killed, there's a sunrise. And the guy turns around and he's like, yes, why? And then Magnum turns around and boom, and they stop it right there with this like fireball coming out of the end of his 1911, and they freeze it right there. And it was the first time on television in that primetime hour where someone had killed somebody else. The hero had killed someone else who wasn't armed.
I forgot about that, but
Very
I'm
cool.
remembering it now.
That
was
cool.
very controversial.
Yeah. And it's so I thought, that's who I need. I need somebody who's a likable guy, who's going to invest in this. And I heard he was like pro-military and that sort of thing. And Chris Pratt's the guy. And that's all the thought I gave to it.
You couldn't have picked a better guy.
So awesome. And who knew what he was going to turn into with Jurassic Park and all? He hadn't done Passengers. He hadn't done anything serious yet. But I also thought about, because I've been studying this since my whole life, and I thought about in the 80s, look what Tom Hanks did in the 80s. He's in Bosom Buddies, he's in Dragnet, he's in The Burbs, he's in Joe versus the Volcano. And then he does something called Philadelphia in the early 90s. And he takes that risk. And since then, he's been able to write his own ticket. He's one of the greatest actors of his generation. And I thought, who's that guy in this generation that needs to stretch a little bit, that needs to do something different? And I'm like, that's Chris Pratt. He can do this. And so I thought of it. And then even crazier, before the first book came out, I'm at Thunder Ranch training, doing some shooting stuff up there in Oregon, and I get this call from a guy that I knew in the SEAL teams. And he's like, hey, bro, do you remember me? And you know Jared. And he was out there in Utah with us. And he's like, hey, bro, you remember me? I'm like, yeah, of course I remember you. How's it going? I hadn't talked to him in 5 years or something. And we catch up a little bit, and he's like, hey, I always wanted to thank you for when I was leaving the SEAL teams. I don't know if you remember, but you had me into your office. You sat me down. You talked about transition. You introduced me to some people in the private sector, and I've never forgotten it. I was like, oh, wow. Hey, of course I'm going to do that for you, because, he's an awesome dude, total stud, great operator, and wants to get out of the team, so I'm going to try to help him as best I can. But he really remembered it, and he said, hey, I heard you wrote a book. And I said, yeah, it's coming out in a couple months here. There are these galley copy things, which are early copies of a novel. I can send one to you. I'd love to send it. And he said, yeah, that'd be great, but I'd like to give one to a friend of mine. And I said, yeah, no problem. Who's that? He said, Chris Pratt. I was like, no way.
Wow.
Yeah. So he gives it to Chris. Chris reads it, and next thing you know, he's optioned it before it even comes out.
Are you a guy who believes in fate? Do you believe in destiny?
So when I was in Ramadi in 2005, 2006, that's where I got to think about this a little bit, because every time you left the wire, anything could have been an IED. And you could have either spent that time on the way to Target and coming back from Target worried about, is that dead donkey on the side? Is that going to blow up and kill me, or hit that Humvee in front of me? That piece of trash right there, is that covering something else? Is there a wire there? You could spend every single mission, especially going to and from Target and even on Target, worried about that. Or you could focus on the mission, focus on the job, get there, do the job, get back. And at that time I was like, I think I have to resign myself to fate here in a lot of these things. Otherwise, my mind is going to be focused not where it needs to be, but on, is that an IED? Is that an IED? And so I thought, all right, you know what? If I get blown up today, that's just how it was. You know, we're doing everything we possibly can to mitigate that, but it could happen, and I'm not going to spend an inordinate amount of bandwidth worried about that, other than trying to mitigate it as best we possibly can. But that's not going to be the focus of everything that I'm thinking about. It can't be. I need to be focused on this mission. I need to focus on contingencies. There's a firefight. I need to figure out what assets are available to come in here for QRF or whatever else, what air we have overhead. How do we maneuver here? All those things. Like, that's what I need to worry
What's
about
QRF?
as a leader. Quick reaction force. So you have those set up at different places in case you get hit, so they can come on in. Usually in like Bradleys or Abrams. Sometimes different vehicles that have a little more firepower than you do as you're sneaking through the streets. So I kind of resigned myself to fate. And there's a book called The Bridge at San Luis Rey. And there's like, I forget how many people, but let's say 5 or 6 people that are on this bridge, and it collapses. And the story is how each one of them got to be on that bridge. Why were those 6 people the ones that were on that bridge at that time? And it's fate. So I guess, and I haven't really thought of it too much since then, other than that experience in Iraq, and just having to, or feeling like I had to resign myself to it.
The Chris Pratt thing is eerie, though.
It's crazy.
It's a little eerie.
It's crazy.
I mean, wonderfully eerie. Now, eerie may be the worst word for it, because pretty amazing.
I feel very fortunate. Yeah. And it's one of those things that
you kind of maybe made that happen. Like, maybe you kind of put that out there as you were writing it, thinking about him.
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know. I say that and I say, shut up, hippie. Like, part of me is like, oh, what do you got, a crystal up your ass too? You know, it's like that.
Yeah, but then,
who
like,
knows?
if I was like, I don't know. I mean, I was, whatever, an average SEAL or whatever. But if I, hadn't taken the time to sit down with Jared, and like, maybe Chris doesn't even know this exists today.
Right.
And other crazy part of this, I thought of Anton Fuqua directing it.
Really?
And he's directing it. Yeah.
Why him?
Because I love Shooter.
Did he do Training Day?
He did Training Day. Got the Oscar for Training Day.
Love that movie.
Magnificent Seven. I knew he'd worked with Chris on Magnificent Seven. I actually did know someone who knew him, but so I did have that connection through someone else. But I love Shooter, which is based on the book Point of Impact by Stephen Hunter with Mark Wahlberg. I love that movie because I love the book so much. They made it more modern for today's time, but it's a Vietnam sniper. Is Bob Lee Swagger is who it originally is. But I just thought he's the guy. He's the guy to direct this thing, and now they're both doing it, which is crazy.
That is
so
crazy.
Yeah.
That's so weird, man, that you had those two people in your head. It's like, that's what makes me think I don't not believe that it's possible to manifest something. But I think most of the people that talk about that stuff are full of shit.
Yeah.
That's where it's a problem. Like, most of the people that talk about that stuff, they're trying to sell you something that, well, you can make your life happen and you just need a dream board and write all those things down. There's a lot of that stuff is horseshit because you got to do the work, right?
That's it.
But part of me thinks that if you do the work and you do have that focus and that intensity, I feel like there might be some sort of frequency that you can tap in where you make things more likely to happen, or possibly you can make things happen. But the thing is, you only hear those stories from the people that are successful. Like, how many people are like, I wrote a book and I had Chris Pratt in my head, and then I ran into him and I said, Chris, and he's like, get the fuck away from me.
No, it's totally crazy how all that stuff kind of comes together.
You couldn't have picked a better guy than Chris. He is such a good guy.
He's such a great guy.
He's almost weirdly nice.
Yeah, no, he's so nice. Maybe that's just different for around here. Maybe, I don't know.
But he's very different in terms of like Hollywood actors. Like, there's a few like him. Like, it's like people love to say that actors are full of shit and they're gross and they're self-centered and narcissists. And yeah, it's true a lot of the time.
Is it really?
But it's not true all the time.
Yeah.
And Chris is a great example of a guy who's like, he's a very religious guy, very pro-military, he's a really positive guy, very, very, very friendly guy. He's not your typical actor.
Yeah, no, he's been so great to me.
Also a huge movie star.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's like, he's not that, guy who does coke and goes to parties, and he's a different animal.
Yeah.
So they do exist, male and female. There are actresses that are great people. They just really genuinely enjoy acting. But for the most part, the people that get into it are people that need a disproportionate amount of attention.
Yeah.
And for the most part, the people that need a disproportionate amount of attention are disproportionately annoying. You know?
Yeah. And usually they like to get rid of the author right away when you option something because they're like, I want to get rid of that guy because he's going to be on set and he's going to be like, that's not my vision. You're ruining my book or whatever.
Right.
So they'd like to get rid of you. But Chris wanted to be involved. So I got to help out on the pilot script for this thing.
That's awesome.
And it is so good.
Now, is this a Netflix thing? Is that what you're doing?
It's still classified.
Okay.
I think they're doing some announcement at some point, but it's a streaming service.
Oh, that's
and
right. Okay, I know what it is. I forgot.
Yeah, so
okay.
it's I think
Can't
it's
say.
8 to 10 part series, maybe something like that. But
8 to 10 parts.
I think
that's
so. I think they'll.
perfect.
I don't know exactly.
That's perfect. Yeah, because if they tried to jam that, you know,
Yeah, I don't think it would work if they tried to do a movie.
Well, you
Yeah.
don't have to anymore.
Yeah, it's great.
People like
and
shows
now
like,
he looks genius, right?
Yes.
Like, especially now.
Yes.
So it looks like such a
that's
good move.
Another crazy fate thing is because when you were doing that, like, when you were writing that in 2016, the streaming thing wasn't what it is today.
Right. And well, even when we did the deal, it was like a movie. It was kind of like that it was early 2018 when we did the deal. And it's like, well, do you have a series or movie? So it's both. It could be both in the contract. And then they decided to do the series, earlier on before COVID even was on the radar. But now it looks like, genius move.